So we have a number of the wines here, and essentially you have 17, 18.
Yeah.
So I was looking back at my notes, and everyone really spoke so highly of the 2018 vintage. Like, what's your take on it?
It's so you had 2016, 2017, which were incredibly warm vintages and lots of ripening, but you also, there was, if you weren't in the right sites and you weren't in control of your vineyards, you can lose some acid, and there's lots of things. But like an 18 was just like this perfect vintage where, you had a fairly warm beginning, but it never got too warm in the summer, and then it cooled down nicely in through the ripening season, but it never got too cold, and it never rained so significantly that it created problems. So it was just one of those perfect vintages in the sense that everything got, you didn't have a huge amount of sugar accumulation and loss of acid, and you still got your flavor maturity and your tannin maturity. And it's kind of like that perfect storm. So 18 was a great vintage. 20, to be honest with you, I think might be the best vintage I've ever been part of.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, other than certain spots such as Horse Heaven Hills getting smoke taint issues,
yeah,
the actual the clouds that came from the smoke, and when they were really high outside of where the fires were, created like this. It just, it's kind of going into a warm phase, and it just stopped everything. And then we had this 2 weeks where everything kind of caught up and slowed everything, sugar accumulation, but you still had this tannin maturity and this flavor maturity. And by the time we started harvesting, it was so perfect. Like everything was like, you almost didn't even need to touch anything. You just started bringing in fruit because it was ready by flavor rather than like pushing at you.
So, well, one thing I did notice in your in particular your Syrahs was that, and I was wondering if that's the 18, although there are some 17s here, but the palate was a little bit, like the center palate was a little bit softer, and I was wondering if you were doing more whole berry fermentation, or was that really the vintage where it has this very subtle and elegant center palate where the tannin spread across?
I would say the only things that we've really changed, James, is we're trying to be a little bit more on our picking decisions, not letting it get so ripe that we're losing our acid and having too much sugar accumulation, and getting more of these like really over the top generous fruit flavors, but losing some of the minerality and the earthiness of the wine. And then the other thing is we've kind of toned back on the extended maceration, where we used to do 45 to 55 days. We're more in this kind of 40-day, not like pulled it back completely, but pulled it back just a little bit, trying to refine and get a little bit more focus to the wines, a little bit more ageability to the wines, a little bit more earthiness and concentration in the mid palate. And that's really the only thing we worked on. So what you're talking about, I think, is completely vintage oriented.
Okay, that's very, yeah, I was wondering because like 17 seemed to be a little bit more like punchy, I would say, while the 18 is just more spread out, really balanced. The wines are really all super drinkable. Like they're savory and you just want to drink them right away.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The 17 was definitely a warmer vintage. It was a lot like 16. It was a warm vintage. And, if you weren't on top of keeping the vines really healthy and vibrant, there was a chance that you can lose the vines in the summer, in August of 2017, to some of the heat spikes that we had. So, one of the things that we really work hard on is keeping our, because we're in a high plains desert and there is no water available, so we're watering our plants, keeping the plants vibrant with water, keeping them healthy, keeping the leaves, where they have the ability to do photosynthesis and do Krebs cycle and do all the things that they need to do, not drying up and losing and senescing the bottom of our, the first 4 nodes or the first leaves at the bottom drying out and dying out, and then your fruit is exposed to the sun, and then you get a huge amount of UV light hitting the grapes, and then you get these harder tannins that you see in a lot of wines sometimes in Washington. I think we did a really good job of that in 17, but you're going to get more of that super unctuous fruit characters, where I definitely agree with you that the 18s are far more elegant, refined, balanced. I think they're going to age a lot better than the 17s. I think you're going to get easily 5 to 10 years out of some of the wines over the 17s.
That's really interesting, because that's exactly how I found the wines. I really, wow, hold on. And I enjoyed them. Some wines, and also some wines did better in 18 than 17, or vice versa. But that's normal. Those are, site specific and
Right.
whatever. But yeah, definitely you get that subtle and more broad brushed sort of wines, which I think is really interesting. Very beautiful. But I thought maybe it's interesting because it when I heard such great things about 18, I thought that it meant the wines would be bolder. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's why I thought it was interesting. Like, hold on, like these wines are like that. And now I understand. It's Napa was a little bit like that as well, where the wines are really balanced and beautiful, and because there was no heat spikes and it was a late growing season, so people made much more refined wines with much more refined tannins and beauty. And it was funny because I thought, and I did, I love the 18s, but at the same time, I think 16 is probably better because it has a little bit more structure. But that's just really splitting hairs. Like, if I was going to buy something, it probably would be the 18s.
Yeah, I think 18s are, I think it's an amazing vintage, not to take anything away from the 17s and 16s, because they're really beautiful wines. But I mean, I think that, 18 is a lot more like 12 in some senses. Not that I didn't think that we made some really, really incredible wines in 2019 because it was a cooler vintage. It was just a vintage that was a little bit more stressful and heartachy and all those things that go with winemaking sometimes, where like the 2020s, they don't, and 2018s don't come around very often, where it's just like everything just feels like it's working because Mother Nature is working with you. And and those are the fun things for winemakers.
Did you try any new things like in 18? I remember a lot of people in Napa were saying, oh, that was my chance to try some, because we could pick any time we wanted, and they did micro vinifications and tried different things. Did you do stuff, or you were just like, wow, this is great, so you were just making awesome wines and just enjoying the whole
I just
experience?
felt like it was great, and like we were doing a lot of harvesting with lower bricks so that we had lower alcohols and higher acid, and just really enjoying the fact that we can get the tannin maturity before the sugar and the acid was out of whack. It was just nice to have that, where it's like, oh, I don't have to wait to pick this. I can pick this now, and it's 23.2 or 23.3, and the acids are, in the high 6s with pHs that are low, and I'm going to get this really incredible. I mean, we're so different than Napa, because like our malates will be in these cooler vintage will be 3.5 to 4.5 malate grams per liter, which they're lucky to get 2. So you have these huge swings in the pH, because you can pick something at like 3.4 pH, and it's going to swing all the way up to 3.8 with that much malate.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Huh.
So,
That's
you'll have these high, what Washington has a lot of typically in these cooler vintages is high pHs and high TAs. So I can have a TA that's like 6.2 or 5.8 and have a pH that's 3.85.
wow.
Yeah.
What does that do? What does that do to the like texture of the wine then?
Well, it's the thing about the pH typically gives you that fleshy quality, like
Yeah,
that feeling of roundness, the higher the pH.
yeah,
But when you have a high TA, then you feel like you have that, like it draws focus on the palate and guides it. So it's like the best of both worlds. You're getting the
exactly.
fleshiness and you're still getting focus at the same time.
Yeah, like it's still sort of framed, even though you get the fleshy, rounder
Right.
texture.
Right. If you
Oh,
had like a
that's
low TA, like in the fours, when you have that high of a pH, it just feels kind of like blah on your
flabby.
palate.
That's
Like
re-
there's
that's more European, I would say. Like, definitely. And other,
that's why I
and they
like
try,
this.
yeah, they try to. You could try to fix it, adding, acidifying, but it's just not the same thing.
No. And that's why I think Washington is, I mean, Washington's so similar in some ways in structure as France and Europe because of that, especially France, because we're on this we're on the same part of the planet, so high,
Yeah,
you know, latitude, and I think that creates a lot of those acid. It's like harvest is fast. It's like if you're harvesting in November, it's too late.
yeah. But it's just interesting. That's 3 years in a row, three excellent vintages. So I think it's a pattern, but they don't like it. Oh no, no, we don't know. We'll see. But they do
Yeah.
admit, and of course they do admit that global warming has actually, benefited Bordeaux.
Yeah, I feel like it's really benefited Washington too. I don't feel like our summers are as hot, but we have a
Hmm.
little bit longer springs, and we don't get the freezes that we used to have. I mean, one of the reasons why we're on our own roots in Washington State is because we used to have these freezes every 6 to 7 years that would just decimate whole vineyards. Yeah, so the biggest problems we have here, rather than phylloxera and Pierce's disease or Eutypa or any of those things, is our
Mm.
biggest problems is uh, crown gall and freeze. Those are our biggest problems, because crown gall causes by the bark freezing and splitting open and the bacteria getting into it, and then freeze basically just will kill the vascular tissue of the vine. I think the 18s, and then I'm bottling the 19s tomorrow, and I just
Hmm.
taste them. They're so beautiful and elegant and refined, and I'm really happy that you noticed that, because I'm really proud of
Yeah,
this. I think they're beautiful wines.
really subtle, like refined, and with the beautiful intensity to them. So, Brennan, when do you think you made the change to wines, like more, like less sort of worked wines, when it more, I don't want, or less concentrated? When was the vintage, or when was the vintage? Because I haven't. I'm just asking because one day I want to drink. There's no use in tasting the wines back from, like you said, to the 2000 to 2010, like early 2000s, because it's the same in Napa and a lot of other places where those aren't the style. Spain,
Right.
Australia, like those aren't the
Italy.
wines. Yeah, yeah, Italy less, luckily. Yeah, if we taste 10-year-old wines, it's not at all. It doesn't reflect where you guys are at today.
No, and I think 10 years from now, what we're really going to see
Yeah,
is I mean, I think we can take the 17s or the 16s and taste them
exactly.
next to the 18s, and we're going to see this huge difference, because I think the wines are much closer now than they're going to be in 5 to 6 to 7 years.
Yeah, but what I like to see, for example, and well, Northern Rhone didn't change that much, while Southern Rhone did. But you see, like, you tasted today's wine, then you tasted 20 years ago, and you can make the connection. You know, that's
Mhm.
the fun part about wine. The problem with that one, the era of over concentrated the rich wines, it's very hard to make that connection because they were so extracted and had so much wood. Maybe in 20 years, the terroir will come out. I've seen that happen, but it's a little bit frustrating because some things are oxidized. I'm talking mostly about Napa from that period, although not everyone went that way. But so probably the wines now, and then the wines in 10 years, they're in the family. You'll make that connection. You know, you saw your son when he was 4 years
10.
old. Yeah, 10, and now he's 20, and you can still, that's what was cool about wine.
I agree. I'm so glad you're saying stuff like that. For me, like making wine or being part of the winemaking process through the vineyards and everything is more like raising children than it is anything, because it's not like you're in complete control. Like, really, there's this being doing its own thing, and really you're just trying to make sure it doesn't walk across a busy street or eat poison or
Yeah.
something like that.
Thanks again for the conversation and tasting. It was really fun to catch up.